Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, Ethiopians have been voting today in regional and federal parliamentary elections. The ballot's been delayed twice. It's the first electoral test for the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his Prosperity Party since he was appointed to the position in 2018 and created the party. 110 constituencies haven't taken part in the election. This includes the Tigray region, where the federal government has waged a war against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF. Well, to find out how much of a key moment this is in Ethiopia, I'm joined now by the Ethiopian academician, author and lecturer, Dr. Awol Allo, who is in the UK. Dr. Allo, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So with much of Ethiopia in turmoil, it seems like the main issues for the electorate is security and the apparent inability of people from different ethnic groups to live together. Against this backdrop, how is it possible to hold elections?
Yeah, absolutely, Charles. I think the central problem, in addition to issues around the inability of the government to provide security, to create the right kinds of conditions for a free, fair, and credible election, there is simply no consensus right now in the country among the various groups who inhabit the Ethiopian state on the future of the country. There's simply no understanding, no common understanding of what kind of society and what kind of people Ethiopians want to be going forward. And the country is marching ahead with an election at a time when there is simply no basic consensus on that very important political question. And also, I think, at a time when the country is fighting a civil war in several regions in the country, against the backdrop of what the United States is calling an act of ethnic cleansing.
So, I mean, we mentioned in the intro there 110 constituencies that aren't casting their ballots. By your calculations, how many voters aren't taking part in this election?
So the electoral board itself at the beginning sets the target of 50 million people. They wanted to register 50 million people. They only managed to register about 37 million people. So that is a significant shortfall in terms of their own original plan. But at the same time, including those people who were registered to vote, you have 110 constituencies who are not participating in the election. That is about 1/5 of the electorate in terms of the federal parliament. But there are also other broader factors in some areas. So the Tigray region is entirely not taking part in the election. In the Oromia regional state, for example, where about a third of the MPs come from, the electorate simply do not have any choice. They're simply voting for the ruling party because the two popular Oromo parties that traditionally represented the voices of the Oromo were forced to boycott the election because some prominent members of the parties were jailed, but also the parties faced significant repression. So their ability to participate in an election diminished to the point that they thought continuing to participate in this election would simply legitimize the government rather than offering a real chance for the electorate. So you have all these pictures, structural, but at the same time, issues relating to basic inability by the government to provide the kinds of conditions that are necessary for people to exercise their right to vote.
And I know you're not in Ethiopia, you're in the UK, but you've got lots of contacts there. Do we know yet how voting has been going and where it's going, where it's been happening and how it's been taking place there?
Well, the latest news that I have seen is that the Electoral Board has extended voting to 9 p.m. It was supposed to initially end at 6 p.m. There are some constituencies where voting was supposed to take place, but the Electoral Board cancelled those elections due to some issues. But generally speaking, I think the voting in these areas where it was intended to take place were not expected to face any major problem, because the government does have such significant level of control. The intimidation, harassment, and the fear that is used to govern the population have really forced a significant part of the society into capitulation. So I don't think there was any expectation of a major episode in these regions. But I think in terms of whether people are exercising their rights, even within this constrained environment, where there's some issues between those already homogeneous parties that are running for election, I think we'd have to wait and see.
And what sort of opponents of Abiy Ahmed have taken part in these elections, and which ones haven't? I mean, is it being boycotted by certain groups?
What is interesting about these elections is the fact that the parties that are running for elections are parties that are ideologically homogeneous, in the sense that political movements, while not exactly of the same political persuasion, the same political views on everything, but in terms of the vision of the country, in terms of the kind of central ideology they have about the Ethiopian state, Ethiopian history, in terms of where Ethiopia needs to go, these parties agree. So these are the parties who are actually participating in the election. Those parties who had a different vision of the future in the country were systematically excluded from the electoral process. These are mainly parties that espouse a federalist future for Ethiopia, parties who want a more decentralized Ethiopia, where at the local level various ethnic groups exercise the right to govern themselves, the right to develop their culture, to use their language, and so on and so forth. So you have some parties who are running in the election, although they are opposition parties, but they are very much aligned with the government. For them, what's really important is not so much this election is democratic, but those political parties who espouse a different vision of the future are marginalized and kept at bay. So these are parties that are willing to do whatever the incumbent wants them to do. But the federalist political movements, including, for example, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, against which the federal government went to war, and now these are insurgent groups. The federal government recently declared them as terrorist organizations. You remember, this is the same political party that governed Ethiopia from 1991 until 2018. The Prime Minister who ran Ethiopia for a long time, Meles Zenawi, was one of the founders of this party. He was, regardless of his human rights record at home, very much praised within the African Union and internationally. And you also have the Oromo Liberation Front, and particularly its armored wing, that was declared as a terrorist organization. So what this And while these two major organizations were declared as terrorist organizations, others were simply repressed to the point that they can simply not make a meaningful participation in the elections. So here I have, for example, the Oromo Federalist Congress Party and its highly popular leaders such as Jawar Mohammed, Bekele Gerba, who were in jail. So ultimately, Charles, the question really is whether the day after the election, the situation on the ground is one that allows Ethiopia to deal with this menacing crisis that it is facing and offers it a chance to take that gradual step to democracy. And I think the answer to that question is a no.
Okay, very briefly, we've got about 20 seconds left. When can we expect to get results?
It's not clear yet where the results would come out, but I think over the next 1 week time, we should be able to find out what the results are.
Okay, Dr. Awol Allo, who is an academician, author, and lecturer, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Dr. Awol was talking to me from the UK. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, London, and elsewhere in the UK, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.